Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome back to Season 2 of Prose and Cons, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. We are a podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers. I am Burnham, and I am joined by Paddy Boylan.
Hello.
Alex Eldridge, who waved at the camera.
My mute button's playing up. Hello.
Matan, Elul.
Hey.
And James Healy.
Hello.
And we're almost a full house. We're missing Phoenix for our glorious return to Season 2. But I think he's going to have a little post roll, so you'll be able to hear his voice at the end of the episode. Yeah, fancy little post roll. So we took a break. And the reason we took a break is we needed to be super productive because we've been busy working on our anthology. And we're really close. It's actually quite exciting. There's going to be 4 podcast episodes dropped for you listeners before the anthology releases. We have the good news of our release date is December 1st, 2022. I'm going to clap for that. I think that's exciting.
It is very exciting. We've worked very, very hard at this. So to actually see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's big.
It's been really exciting. Where we're up to is the proofing stage of kind of the final file that we're going to be uploading that you'll be able to access. And I don't know, I had a really cool moment when I kind of first time, a moment of, it's actually real. It's not just our individual files now. It's all compiled together. It's in the proper formatting. It's been line edited to death. I kind of loved it. Did anyone else have that same little giddy schoolgirl feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Seeing it as a thing, it is finally nearly a book, rather than just a bunch of disparate stories which we've been picking at endlessly.
I think it was probably the legal stuff at the beginning for me. That was like the exciting thing. I was like,
yeah. It's
really?
fun seeing that
was
real. I made a point of putting that in there to be like, this is real. It's official. It's even more like wild when you actually have the physical book and be like, wow, I made this. This is a book. Like, there's things you get out of the library. I got one. It's mine now.
Maybe it's too early to make this point, but it's just crazy how it all started just by us having a conversation. Was it on Zoom? I think it was on Zoom, right? And Ali saying like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we all wrote stories and put them together?
Yeah.
And here we are.
And it is cool. We were right.
And it's been a very, very long road. So it's good to finally be seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to physically holding it. We are entering it into a competition, and part of entering it into comps is you got to send to the judges the physical thing. So kind of a part of our timeline is making sure we're ordering those in so we can put them in the post and get them into the hands of the judges and all that fun stuff. But we won't bore you with all that too much this episode because our next 2 episodes you'll be listening to are some backlog eps we have of the process. We've just been talking about it as we go, reflecting on all the small tasks, how we've been divvying it up as a team. So if there are any listeners out there who are interested in like the nitty gritty of our process, how we've been working together as a group, all the fun legal stuff, how we've been divvying up roles and responsibilities so we can function as a working team, tune in and listen to that process. Otherwise, I will do the briefest plug. So it is December 1st. You'll be able to hear all the news about the new Mythic by Precipice Fiction on our socials. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Precipice Fiction. Twitter, I don't know how you feel about Elon Musk, but Twitter is also at Precipice Fic, and our website is www.precipicefiction.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter. So you won't miss any news about the release, pre-release, all that stuff if you follow us there. And we're also doing this fun, like once a week social media takeover at the moment. Phoenix has just done a week of social media. Matan is currently doing it. So maybe today he will tell you all about podcasting in real time.
I already complained about waking up early on our Precipice story.
And I'm going to throw it over to James, and he's going to tell you about when it drops on December 1st, how you'll be able to get a hold of this thing.
Yeah, so it'll be dropping on December 1st, and you'll be able to get a hold of it on Kindle.
Beautiful. So today's topic, we're going to dive straight back into our usual programming, where we're going to be talking about our writing practice and what we're learning and our wisdoms along the way. So how we usually kick off our podcasts, we talk about what we've been consuming. And because we've been away for like 5 weeks, we've probably been consuming a lot of media. So I was going to make a little house rule for this episode that you're only allowed to talk about one thing. Don't talk to me about all the things you've been watching over 5 weeks, because we could probably fill a whole episode on that. Tell me one thing that you have been reading, gaming, watching, that has had an impact on you over the past 5 weeks. I'm going to throw it to Alex.
Yeah, obviously I've been looking and consuming a lot of things, but I think the thing that has been most directly influencing me has been playing through Bloodborne. I just got, for anyone who doesn't know, it's like a Souls offshoot, Dark Souls sort of offshoot thing. And it's set in like Victorian, theoretically England. And it's one of those things that while you're playing it, you're like, oh, okay, cool, this is spooky, you got to do things, this is incredibly difficult, okay. But then like the lore that surrounds it, like if you're like a wiki deep diver, it's just the absolute motherlode. Like it's just so, it just goes so unbelievably deep. Like even the, anyway, so I've been doing that and using that as a direct inspiration for a little novella I'm writing, and just sort of taking elements of that and trying to transpose them into this thing I've been doing. But yeah, it's an older game. If you have a PS4 or 5, I really recommend getting it because it is wild.
Nice. What have you been consuming, James?
I guess most notably, or the thing that has just had the biggest impact on me, was I just watched Netflix's All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. It's an adaptation of the 1920s novel, which is kind of like known as a like literary masterpiece about young German soldiers going to war on the front lines in like 1917 or something. It was really harrowing, really brutal, really tragic, really, really, really good. A really good anti-war film. I think I'm kind of repeating what a lot of the critics are saying, but most anti-war films still have an element of like being kind of pro something, pro battle or pro comradeship or pro something. Whereas this just showed how like stark and harrowing and unpleasant battle and fighting and death was, that it genuinely just feels like hard to watch. And yeah, just a really beautiful, sad, brilliant story. It's an absolute masterpiece. I'd highly recommend it to anybody.
Nice. And are you writing anything at the moment? I
am actually. I've been kind of chipping away kind of 200 or 300 words a day, kind of in between work and training at a novel. And I've made it up to about, I'm just short of 40,000 words at the moment. So it's kind of like the halfway point.
James, that's a lot of words, man. You haven't told us anything about this. And you're like, I just got 40,000 words in a novel.
Kind of keeping it quiet till I got up to a certain point, and I was like, okay, now I know it's real.
So like when you're pregnant and you keep it quiet for the first trimester, just in case you, We
can see your bump, James. We can see your baby bump.
That's a good analogy. I'd say 40,000 is done.
That's the point.
Well, congratulations on the new novel.
Thank you so much. Do
you know what genre it's going to be?
Post-apocalyptic thriller horror-ish. Yeah.
Sounds on brand.
Post-apocalyptic zombie thriller, kind of the feel.
Ooh, nice.
I think you've told me about this one a little bit.
This is that one I told you.
Yeah.
The gritty one.
Exciting. Cool.
Yeah.
Paddy, tell us about what you've been consuming.
I'm trying to decide on the thing I want to talk about, because we're trying to keep this a little shorter and just talk about one. We've already talked about a game. We've already talked about a TV show. Okay, so I'm reading an essay on metaphysics. I think it's actually called An Essay on Metaphysics. I have a friend, shout out to you, Milky. We're just going to call him Milky. That's all he gets known as, who is a philosophy student. He's very, very smart. He's much smarter than me. And he's dumped this on me because I once had a conversation with metaphysics and he was trying to articulate some things. It's interesting. But boy, is it hard to read, because he gets into philosophical logic a lot. And there's a lot of sentences which are like, and this thing, which is not thing A, but is thing B, except in the circumstance where it isn't thing C, which we'll come back to, and thing B. And my main takeaway as a writer that commas are your friend. Commas are your friend. There's definitely sections where if you just added a little bit of punctuation, it would be so much clearer. But maybe that's also what happens when a philosopher talks to what he imagines are philosophy students and not us dummies who aren't used to digesting 8-point nested
Yeah.
logic comments.
I live with a law philosopher and I do a lot of nodding and I'm like, of course, that's the only conclusion you can draw from X, Y, and Z. I knew that.
Even written down sometimes it's not much clearer, but it's very interesting. And writing wise, I am starting to write again after an incredibly long hiatus. I just wrote an essay for a magazine called Conflicts, and the essay was about what's happening to disabled people in Ukraine at the moment. Yeah, I'm going the full serious writer thing. And I just wrote a short horror story, which I'm not sure is fit for public consumption. Don't know if I want to release it yet.
Are we the public?
What are those horror stories?
Where are we?
I might
Where do
show
we
you
stand?
guys. I don't know, but it's called
You
Man
send me one
Crab.
like that, and I'll send you one like that back.
Yeah, okay. All right. It's called Man Crab, and it's I go into
Excellent
places that I've not gone
Let's go.
elsewhere.
That sounds Kafka-esque.
I have to read Man Crab. You cannot, deny me Man Crab.
We'll see.
Once you name it, you got to keep it.
I might release it under a pseudonym. I don't know. Yeah, that's me. That's what I've been doing.
Nice. And Matan, tell us what you've been consuming and writing.
Well, I've read a lot of books, but at the moment I'm actually reading a non-fiction called *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari. Maybe some of you heard about it.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it, but it does give me a whole buttload of existential anxiety because it keeps reminding me that I'm just a really smart chimpanzee, which I thought I'm okay with, but the more he repeats it, the less okay I am with it. And apparently it does bother me, and I'm not afraid to say it. It bothers me. Anyway, it's a great book. It tackles a lot of topics about humanity, from fire, agriculture, and why everything we believe in is not true. So read it, but just don't let it sink too deep. As far as writing, I'm chipping away at the big bad monster called Absolution, which is the book. I have taken tiny breaks to work on some short stories, which is nice. It's refreshing, but I'm really trying to put my heart and attention into the book and try to finish it by the end of something. Not even going to put a time frame on it this time. But
the George R. R. Martin of
in a
our
way.
group, Matan here working on the beast.
Yeah,
He's been working on for a while.
Yeah.
This is going to be perfect fodder
at
for our subject
but
today.
At least he got there after publishing a bunch of books. I'm just okay.
140k is pretty rough, Matan. So you have our sympathies.
Thanks.
Is that how big it currently is?
It's getting there. Didn't you say, Matan? 135.
It does feel, Alex, on top of it, it does feel like that's where it's going. Like sometimes the book is like more. And anyway.
Can I make you feel better? Did you want to try and guess what the first draft of Majesty was?
Have I read it?
No, not the first. No one's seen the first draft.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say 180,000.
It was 270.
Wow. Oh my God.
I then cut it in half and then almost halved it again.
Wow.
Yeah, no. So write as much as you need to find it. Just do it. As long as you love editing as much as I do.
But when you see that kind of word count, you have a voice in your head like Patrick Rothfuss got away with it.
Yeah, right.
If there was ever a genre to do it,
got away with
fantasy.
300,000.
Yeah.
This is what we get for Brandon Sanderson being our muse. It's a poor goalpost for the start. Then we just have to whittle our way back to something sensible. For myself, I've been watching and finished the second season of Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal. Has anyone else in this group heard of that?
No.
Is this the Samurai Jack guy?
This is the Samurai Jack guy. So he released the first season of Primal maybe, I want to say 3 years ago. And then we finally got the second season this year. And if you love stylistic, wonderfully written animation, they're really short episodes. So you're talking about 10, 15-minute episodes, I think. They're beautiful. So they're really stylistic, gory, horrific. So my household sits down to like we got to brace ourselves. We're going to put a primal on, and we know the next 15 minutes is about to do something abhorrent to us. And it'll start off sometimes quite cutesy, because at the end of the day, if I had to describe it, it's a like buddy cop show between a man and his dinosaur. But then also it'll make you like fear for your life, your soul, and all that you love dear. Is my best pitch of this TV show. So go and watch Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal. I'm not entirely certain where you find it, because you can buy the DVD of the first season, but we've had to obtain it through other methods to be able to watch season 2, but
entirely legal means.
Yeah, other legal means that are hard to explain on Zoom. But have a look about where to find it, because it is absolutely worth it. All right, so today's topic, tying in fittingly with our coming to the end of our anthology and getting ready for it to be published, I pitched to the group, when is something finished? So when do you put something down and when to call it done? I thought this could be quite a, I don't know, fun, controversial topic, just because I know I'm already going to throw like Alex and Matan on the bus, that I have an instinct they might be on opposite ends of this spectrum.
I just knew it. I saw the prep and I knew it. I knew what I'm walking into. Okay, let's go.
I needed both of you on the same podcast to discuss it, but I thought I would sink our toes into it gently. So just tell me to start with, do you have a project you have finished? And how did you know it was finished and when you called it?
Yes. I'm thinking back to my story, The Fall of Behemoth. It was finished when I was so sick of pedantically editing it that I literally couldn't stand to look at it again. And that's what I found with a lot of that stuff. Yeah, familiar. But I don't think I have a problem with finishing stories plot-wise so much, which I feel very grateful for. Mine is in the obsessive line edits. Like, for example, I could swap 2 words around, or I could just do little changes to a sentence, and really, like, it makes probably very little difference to the story, and the reader is very unlikely to. I mean, if maybe it's like a 1% improvement from one draft to another, I don't know, but it's a real sort of obsession of mine to get each line perfect. And there's a point where I just have to like say, no, I need to stop. I need to stop toying with this. It's good enough. I don't know if you guys feel that as well, but yeah, same with Trader, my anthology story. I just had to like say, no, I'm done. I can't do anything.
Can I say, I remember having a conversation with Paddy about that story. I remember reaching out to him and being like, hey, I really like this. There's this change that I recommend you make. And Paddy straight up came back to me and he was like, you know what, that's probably a really good idea. I'm not going to do it though, because I can't fucking stand working on this story anymore. Like that was that, and I was like, that's fair. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe a good segue to, I really love the quote, when is a painting finished? Because it just so clearly illustrates the nature of any artistic product. Now, as you guys know, my bar for completion of something is probably pretty low. Basically, I get it to a point where I'm like, okay, this is good enough for generically me. Like this is quote unquote good enough. At that point, it's usually time to give it to someone else who has another perspective. I just tend to think of things in terms of diminishing returns. So I look to get things at the point where the diminishing returns of me obsessively going over it are not adding significantly more to it, to the point where it's like, look, I can spend another 50 hours on it. I could feasibly do that. But the return I get from that is going to be negligible, and I'm probably just better off making something else.
Yeah.
I've got a whole philosophy based on this, but yeah, essentially I get it to the point where those two things intersect and then go, okay, that's fine. It's time to give it to someone else. They will have a more objective idea of what's good here or what's not. And then, yeah, from there, I'll sort of go on that.
What I'm hearing is there's almost 2 measuring sticks. Like, when is it finished for the writer and when is it finished for the work?
That's not a bad way of looking at it. Yeah. Because I know that mine is probably lower than it should be, but it doesn't mean it can't get there. I just need to hand it off to someone who has that perspective.
Yeah, and I'd probably want to talk about it more in depth. It could be its own podcast episode in the future, but kind of the mental health aspect tied into this as well, because I feel like I pendulum between, depending on how much time I take away from a project. Like I could be quite close and deep in the hellscape of doing line edits and feeling like I'm really close and being like, I can't sink any more time into this. It's done. It's got to be done for me. And then I put it away. And time goes by, my attention's gone into something else, and then I come back to it and read it. And say if it hasn't gone out into the world, it hasn't been published in any way, if I still love it and I'm reading it, I'm kind of like, wait, no, I can actually go back and do another draft of this. I've been away from it long enough that I can return to it. I can see all the stuff now, and I do want to go back. There are some projects I don't. So I'm thinking of Majesty in particular. This is one that I've sat with for ages, and I've been very close at times where I think I'm done, and then I have to put it down for whatever reason and work on something else for almost close to 12 months. But it's been in the back of my brain. I've talked about rumination before, and I feel like I already have a new structure for Majesty. I want to genuinely go back and tear that apart now. I think I have a new opening. I have a new kind of first act I want to try, just because even though it's been 12 months and I thought I was done, like my creative juices have already torn it apart without my permission. So I have to go back to it.
There's a really good analogy for what you've just described in audio production terms, and that is called ear fatigue. So when you work on something for a really long time, let's say 6 hours in a row, you're listening to the same drum beat going over and over again, your ears normalize what it is, and you lose the ability to finesse and figure out what's going on. If you leave the room for about half an hour, and you might have to extend that time based on writing, but if you leave the room and come back to it, suddenly you might see that this thing here is completely sticking out of the mix and like ruining it for everything else. But because you've been hyperfixated on it so much, you couldn't see the forest for the tree. So it's like when you feel the need to jump into line edits, sometimes it's a really good idea to step back and go like, well, hang on, did I have to completely remove a third of that before I start obsessively going over the details? So that's an element of it as well.
I definitely have that with editing cooling engines for the anthology. At a certain point, the dialogue in that story, I was just like, I can't relate to this at all. I don't know if it's good or bad or indifferent. I don't know how I feel about it. Whatever that was in like earlier drafts, I was just like, I just don't want to touch the dialogue because I no longer have a sense of what it is anymore. And I was like, I could just strip out all this dialogue and put in completely different dialogue that I've never seen before and feel the same about it, because I had just gone over it and over it and over it and over it. And I was like, right, I can't touch that anymore. But I would be the same as yourselves. Like I would just keep making line edits forever. So I have to give myself a deadline. I sort of have to ask myself, like, how good do I think this story is? And does it warrant any more time for me to keep working on it? That's a lot easier with like quite short stories under 3,000 words. You kind of have a sense of like, oh, I really like what I did in that story, or a sense of like, that one kind of worked out okay. So you're not going to be too obsessive over the one that kind of worked out okay, because it's not really going to pay off if it's not a good story anyway. Or something that you're pretty happy with, I don't mind putting a little bit more time into it just to make sure it's really, really tight.
It's a weird space to be in when you reach that point where you lose all objectivity on something. It's kind of disconcerting. Like, oh God, I've lost my ability to tell good work from bad work.
Yeah,
and you haven't. You just need to
be like
away
Shutter
from
Island.
the work.
I gotta say, if you had asked me how it should be, I would tell you just listen to Alex. But since you asked how do I do it, I'll tell you the truth. When it comes to short stories, I think I can pat myself on the back. I usually write them. I let you guys or someone else read them, and probably I go through it once, twice, and that's it. The thing is, for me, I don't even do line edits when it comes to my novel. I just start from a white page with the chapter number, and I just rewrite the whole thing from scratch. And it just happens differently. I feel like, to me, it's not the obsessiveness. I don't obsess with the line. I obsess with the plot. I'm like, and what if this can go differently? And it's a bit like Jenga, because if chapter 15 happens dramatically differently than chapter 16, it has to echo through the whole thing. And I just can't resist it, because I always think about, okay, this is the book I wrote, but what about the book I could have written? is that book better? That potential book. Also, it doesn't help that I've developed the habit of editing before I finish the first draft, which I do not recommend to anyone at all. Don't go there. Don't start. Just leave the lid on. And the last thing I'll say is that I'll speak for myself. I've felt like generally a new writer. I'm still developing my voice. I think it's true to most of us. And when you write a novel, sometimes it takes years. And your voice, your writing voice changes. Things that were your style in 2020 are not necessarily your style today. And when you read the chapter that you wrote even 7 months ago, and maybe you read a lot of other books in the meantime, that's just not you anymore. It's not the line is bad, but the current you, like, I would have done this differently. And I would recommend to writers, look, we read a lot. Some of us are more impressionable than others. Find your voice, crystallize it, and trust it. Don't let the most recent book you read shake the foundations of what you wrote until now. Because it can happen. You can read a book that they don't put adjectives. They don't say who said something. Don't let it just shake everything you wrote. Stick to what you wrote. Trust the past you. That's what I would say, and I should do it a bit more.
I'd like to counterpoint that a little bit, if I could, just quickly. I agree that changing voice on a current work is probably not a good idea. And I've never really written anything as long form as you have, for example, Matan. But experimenting with different voices can be really good. Reading something new and saying like, oh, I want to try that voice, and then trying that with a new story. I found that to be really valuable.
Yeah, I think the crux
Definitely,
of it is,
new stories.
Yeah, this idea of short form versus long form. And if you're working on a project that's taking years of your life, Matan's 100% right. You're going to change as a writer. I feel like even after 3 months, I'm always learning new things about prose I didn't know 3 months previously. And I hope my entire writing career, I always want to be skilling up. I don't want to get to the point where I feel like, oh, I now know everything about writing, and everything I write, my voice is now stagnant. So I always want to be improving. But this idea that if this project's going to take years and years, how do you handle, or how do you relate to this idea that you're going to be changing as a writer, but then also your values and your taste will continue to sharpen and hone across the years as well. So your first draft, the reason you might have such a repulsive knee-jerk reaction to what you've written is because you have different taste. You literally have different taste than you did 3 months ago. And being okay with that, like I envy the poets and the short form writers of the world, because you almost have to embrace this idea that this piece of art was created in that moment, in time, in that time capsule, in that context, by that person you were at that time, and being able to make peace with that. And you can when you're writing short form. And that's almost the journey I've had to go on with the short story I'm putting into the anthology. But my long form work, I feel the same as you, Matan, in that I'm always questioning, well, I'm now at this point and I have the ability to go back and bring the whole thing up to where I am now, and I want to do that. So it's a thorny question. I don't have the answer to it, because Nathan, my partner, is constantly needling me, being like, why haven't you shown it? Like, why aren't you querying it yet? And I'm like, because it's not done. It'll never be done. And he's like, yeah.
Take it from my cold dead fingers.
I think it goes to the heart of what makes a writer a writer. Because when I think of a work, any one work, that I'm writing, I try and think of it, and usually succeed, I think, in terms of being a space of time that it belongs to. And I fundamentally think I've come to terms with the fact that hopefully I am not as good a writer as I will be in the future. So I'm actually okay with leaving that incomplete or not ideal, like imperfect work in the space where it lives, because with any luck, I'll be able to go on and improve upon that. And theoretically, I'll make a perfect opus at some point, and hopefully I'll have developed the toolkit to be able to know when that happens and stick to it at that point. But I don't know. I find coming at it from that perspective, even though it's a little counterintuitive, makes it much easier to move on with anything that's being done.
You've talked to us before about the idea that, like, every book you write or every piece you write is moving you closer toward that thing that you're going to write that's going to be brilliant. And I feel like that's really helped you. Like you are really able to just finish a work and move on, finish a work and move on. And I guess keeping that idea in future, like, yeah, this is all just grist for the mill, is probably a great way to just like overcome those barriers if it's not good enough.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but it's closer to the thing.
It's like tricking yourself into going like, I mean, look, you can take this too far and be like, oh yeah, but it doesn't matter because I'll do a better one later. So you don't want to go too far off the rails into that sense as well. And I'm aware of that, but I think I've got enough self-awareness to be like, no, I'm going to make sure this is fine and like go from that. But that has been incredibly helpful to me to be just like, this is going to let me move on to the next thing. But that's in my nature as well, just to the next thing. So
I agree with that 100%. There's value in almost pulling the trigger earlier to be able to like learn from that experience. But at the same time, I feel paralyzed sometimes when I watch my peers pull the trigger early on querying because I can see that they're at the mental state of being done. They're like, I need this out of my life. I just need to put it into the ether and see if someone loves it and accepts it, when I feel like I know and I've communicated to them, like hopefully as a beta reader, that I'm like, I don't think it's ready yet, but they pull the trigger anyway, and then they're disheartened when it doesn't come back. And then I worry that I might be that writer as well. So it's obviously this is an awful loop of self-doubt, and it's only things we can learn from. But I didn't know if that's a relatable thing to you guys as well.
Well, that's also related
absolutely.
to this self-publish and querying things,
Yes.
but that's a whole different conversation. So
I'll just say, it's nice to share, and like spill all our problems and issues, but there is for me a magic solution, and it's really trusted, reliable beta readers. It just works. Even for me, with all my editing paralysis and all that stuff, it just works. If I had enough stamps on a chapter, it's usually safe from my editing. Like there are chapters even in my book that looks like a Frankenstein's monster from all the editing. There are chapters that like Alex, James, Ali, Paddy, they all said it kicks ass, and it largely stays untouched for years on end as I go on. So have a good network of beta readers, and I think even the most insecure writers, at some point, like, yeah, okay, enough people said it's good, I can move on with it.
Yeah. This has got to be the piece of advice that we've given the most, I think. Have good beta readers. Like we say it every like 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah.
It's so true though.
No one can write in isolation because it needs an audience. Yeah.
I think it's because of my job at Westwards, but I'm thinking about programming opportunities, and I'm like, man, if we get a cool Prose and Cons network, we can like connect other people to their own beta readers, and wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the number one question someone might have is like, oh, well, that's all fine and dandy, but where am I going to find beta readers? And it's, so the programmer in me is like, well, let's solve that.
Yeah. Having said all this, there is a science fiction author that I really like called Gene Wolfe, who took 6 years to write a science fiction novel. No one knew he was doing it because no one knew he was a writer. When he's just like, oh yeah, I've written this novel, and it turns out to be this giant masterpiece. And that was without any outside feedback. So there's always the freaking
state of mind. Can you imagine the state of mind of 6 years just not telling a soul, or at least
I think he just had incredible self-confidence that what he was doing was great. But for the rest of us, we need beta readers.
That's what I'm doing wrong.
Just lock yourself in a room for 6 years with a pen and absolutely no feedback. You'll be fine.
Or go to prison. You get 3 meals a day while you do it. So
there you go.
Prison books. That's the new thing, guys. Let's put it on TikTok.
First it was COVID books, now it'll be prison books.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matan. I feel like you've been cut off a couple of times, James. Did you have a thought?
I think it was probably just on beta readers. I think that I tend to edit before I go and give it to a beta reader, and I kind of wish that I would bring it to beta readers earlier on when it wasn't so polished, because it might give me more room to maybe take it apart a little bit. But because I haven't gotten to the point now where I'm querying stuff. The thing for me is when I start giving it to the beta readers, I would just like to move that process ahead a little bit more, so that it wasn't so. I just didn't spend so much time working on it before I started.
I think one of my early mistakes was I think I skipped to the line edit stage too quickly as well. And then I would have beta readers who would give me very good line edits as well, when what I needed to be doing for the project at the time was still thinking about the big picture structure stuff. So that's what I've come to terms with Majesty, is I've done so much line editing on Majesty. I've paid for an external editor who's helped me work on it, but now I'm realizing, no, it's there's structure problems here. I need to play with the structure again, and I'm going to be rewriting new scenes from scratch, which means I'm going to be doing line edits again. So it's kind of being really clear about when I pull the trigger, I guess, moving myself from the big picture structure thinking to the minute line edit thinking.
I think that's very good. That's very, very good advice, and I think that's something as a young new writer at the beginning, you just jump into line editing. It makes sense for you. Oh yeah, I'm gonna polish this thing. When through the years you realize, no. First structure, plot, have the whole thing to look at, and then you worry about line editing, which is something I'm sad to say I've only recently come to understand.
Counterpoint to that, while you kind of think of it as all of that maybe wasted time line editing, or maybe all of those wasted line edits that were really beautifully written and now have to get scrapped to put them somewhere else, that's still great practice. Like that is kind of like building up the muscle of doing that again and again, and then having the bravery, I guess, or just recognizing the need to scrap something that was really well written in order to fix the story. That's also a muscle that is unfortunately.
Yeah.
But things are a part of the process, even though they're horrible.
It's tricky as a pantser too, because you might not necessarily have the whole thing in front of you, so you gotta, you go through and you make it up as it goes, and then actually it is nice getting to the end of it and being like, that bit at the middle was horrible. I'll just have to redo that. But because you then have it all in front of you, you can be like, okay, cool, I can surgically take that out and write a new one, which is what I've been doing the whole time I did this. So, but yeah, I agree with Ali 100%. The gold is in the plotting, is in the having the beats, because I don't know about you guys, but I can, if I've got the beats, if I've got the skeleton or the scaffold to go, I can write all day, and it might go off somewhere else, but that's its own thing. But I think plotting is where the gold is, initially at least.
I do have a question for the pantsers among us though, because I had a and James and Paddy to a degree. I think you're the only one who won't need to answer the time. But so I think when I was navel gazing on this question, I think of myself that I dramatically redraft, because it takes me a while to really figure out like what it is. And what I mean by that is kind of the heart and the core. I think my background coming from screenplay and being a bit of a gun for hire for screenwriting is I don't always invest like maybe heart first. I'm maybe a bit more intellectual first. That's why I'm a bit of a plotter. So kind of working out, what it's about. What do I care about? What itch am I scratching when I'm writing this? It takes me a while to find that. So that I think that's why I'm quite willing that when I get a note, I'm happy to upend it and throw it all out and do the big structure stuff, because I'm not precious, but at the same time, I need to do that process to find what it's about. While I've observed in other writers who are perhaps very sure of what it is from the start, and that's amazing and that's great, because usually there's a fantastic raw energy there. But because of that, they almost have the opposite problem where they're not willing to pull the Legos apart, because they're like, no, that's what it was. I've pulled it out of me and it's now on the page and it's there, so I'm not touching it. And there's a resistance to editing. So I guess what I'm saying is, where I feel like I edit too much and I spend too much editing and I'm never sure because I can't find its heart, where maybe people are too precious about its heart. Do you guys relate to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, I need to get to the end, because I am a pantser. I'm like a pretty pure pantser, and I've tried plotting something out, and I actually have done it for a couple of stories. And I just find as soon as I've written the plot, I lose all interest for it, which is just so irrationally frustrating. It doesn't
really.
It's very as someone who's very concerned with efficiency, it's very highly inefficient.
Has anyone ever suggested you might have attention deficit disorder?
Absolutely. I'm actually looking into this now. I'm reading a book about it, and it looks like it's very, very likely.
But this is really common though for pantsers. They hate outlining because it ruins the magic. They know how it ends.
I've had that same experience, and people have also suggested I might have a little bit of ADHD.
Having said that, but once you get to the end of it, it's like, well, this is done. You wrote it. It's good. But I understand now that it's because as much as I don't want to know how it goes in advance, I am a tinkerer and I like to tweak the knobs and make it go. So if I read through and get to a soggy middle and be like, he's just going from place to place and this is so boring, I'm 100% just happy to chop something out and sub something else in. But then I have to do the pantser again from there and try and make that link up at the end, which can be challenging. So it's just this very specific process of redrafting that at no point allows me to be like, well, just make that happen there. Like, so it's very funny, but yeah.
Wow. I love plotting. I really enjoy that part. Whenever I have a writer's block, I just plot. Sometimes I world build. I feel like a kid with Legos. Let me just do anything that is not literally writing. And that's fun. I just enjoy it. I have sticky notes. I like to write, like at some point for a short story, I plotted 3 potential endings, and then I just developed the one I liked into the actual ending. That's just me. I like to plan. Maybe it's my crippling anxiety, but I love it.
I would definitely be in the same boat as Alex. If I sit down and plot out like what should be a 60 to 80,000 word novel, I like write it out over the course of like 2,000 or 3,000 words. I've written the story, and now it's just like, oh, that's dead now. I don't care about it anymore. I can't ever sit down and write a proper story about it. So I have to write out like a really rough structure, because if I pants, then I'll just go off the rails and I'll never finish the story. So I'm going to have to trick myself by having a little bit of a structure where I kind of know the character gets chased from A to B, and then B is an obstacle and they turn around and face what they're chasing, and then they have a change of heart. But I don't know what any of this is when I actually get to the writing of it. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what this scene is. So I have to sit down and pants it when I get there. But then I know that it's going to lead the character to this. So it needs to be kind of a loose structure that makes me feel like I know where I'm going. And then when I get there, I'm like, oh, there's nothing here. Great. I get to find out what this was about then as I'm writing it, which is definitely the fun of writing for me. I don't think I could do it another way.
So I have one final question before we throw over to our reading for this episode. What is your relationship with the story appearing in the new Mythic? How do you feel at the end of it? How did you feel about the process? And in particular, the moment of handing it over and not being able to touch it anymore. When did you know it was finished?
I'm going to be a bit shameless here and just say, look, it's one of the best things I've written. It's great. It's ready. Yep. You guys polish the heck out of it. And the constant beta reading / commentating just made it a very easy process compared to other works I've been doing. So I'm really feeling very, very complete with this one.
And what's the name of your story?
I wrote Glyphlight, which I'm hoping you guys will enjoy.
Go Paddy.
I mean, having a definite endpoint has been wonderful because I can finally say, like, I'm not touching this story ever again. What's interesting, this is a story that I'd written. It was actually the first finished piece of short story I ever wrote. I only started writing properly just a little while ago, probably about a year and a half ago, maybe a little more than that. I thought the story was done, and I was very, very proud of it. I was like, oh, this is... And then when I brought it to this group and I started getting feedback, I realized that there's so much more I could have done on it. And things that I just assumed were just great prose were confusing, or a lot of the feedback I got was, I don't understand what's happening in this scene. So this has been a really good process. And having a definitive endpoint, actually having a shut-off point where, because we've obviously said, like, now we're done, we can't touch this stuff anymore. That's been good because of my tendency to obsess and tinker, being able to say, like, no, actually, it's finished. Having that artificial endpoint's been very liberating.
You're nodding, Alex?
Yeah. So the one I did, yours was the Trader. Paddy's is called the Trader.
Mine is called the Trader. Yes.
So the one I wrote was Town Hall Steps, and it was actually the first thing I had written since I came back to writing, because I hadn't done any fiction writing, I think, since I was maybe in high school. But I always thought I had a novel in me, so I was just like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. And I read this Stephen King book of short stories, Skeleton Crew, which is really, really good, and I still really love that book. And that kind of stirred me into wanting to write horror. When I did it, I got really inspired by, I tend to get inspired by specific places. And in this case, I remember walking through the central tunnel thing and going, wow, that would just be a really cool thing for a zombie apocalypse type thing. So having done it and got it finished and, handing it in to you guys to have a look at it has been super helpful. It's just, I don't trust my own perspective on something when something's done. So I just prefer to hand it off to someone else and be like, what is wrong with this? Tell me what's wrong with it. And then they'll tell me. And usually it's something that I could have in the back of my mind intuited, but maybe couldn't articulate. So a lot of those things were done. A lot of things were just sort of slightly switched around. Tension points were ratcheted up. But yeah, it's great just to have that, have the picture of it, have it be in a book and be able to go like, yeah, this is a thing I made. And that's how I felt when I did my other collection of short stories, which I put out recently.
Which is Golden Hour, written by A.R. Eldridge, available now on Amazon Kindle.
I have it right here. It's holding the TV.
He has it.
Yeah, it's fine. But
we can edit in a picture later.
And James.
So I wrote Cooling Engines. It was the first short story I wrote because it was originally written as an opening chapter of a novel that I never finished. And it was the first thing that I decided to make into a short story. So what I did was I just kind of took that first chapter and then wrote an ending for it. And with most things I write, it might start off with an emotion or an idea or some aspect of like writing craft that I'm trying to pull off. And I'll end up like writing a story and I may or may not express the emotion or manage to do what I'm trying to do, but I'll still be pretty happy with the story that came out of it. So Cooling Engines is one of those that I guess most of the things I wanted to get out of it, I did. I think the core idea didn't land true, but I will write that again like later on, probably within the same setting and the same characters. But yeah, definitely very, very happy with how it turned out. If we did another round of drafts now, there's a bunch of stuff I'd change.
Yeah.
So just being practical, I'm pretty happy that we've hit our deadline now and are ready to call it a day. But yeah, really, really happy with Cooling Engines. Hope it reads as a bit of a fast-paced thriller. With a good tense tone to it, and I hope everyone enjoys it.
And I had to be very deliberate as well with mine. So mine is The Stolen Sword. When we were doing our very final round of minute line edits, I almost had to give myself the discipline not to go back and read it like the whole thing again. I was only just reading the sections that had notes on them because I knew if I did another top to tail full read that was for any other reason than just proofing, I would start tinkering and changing. And I've actually been a bit kind of scared to go back and read it because I knew I probably I'd have that itch again to go in and upend it all again, pull the Lego apart and write it again. So I have to be very disciplined with myself not to have done that and just be proud of it for what it was that came out of that cycle. And I am really proud of the editing cycle. I almost feel like I'm going to always have a really soft spot for this story, not just because it is the world that I've been working on since I was like a goddamn teen, and I love these characters. They've been the weird voices in my head for over a decade now, but a soft spot specifically because of the editing process we put it through, that where all of us were editing on it and all our voices are in it to some degree. And I think that's really sweet. It's sweet stitching. So I love it for that reason. And I think I have to look at it with those rose-colored glasses, because if I was to put on my editing goggles now, me, the 3 or 6 month later writer, I'd be like, I write it completely different now. But I'm waiting to do that read, I think, once I have the physical copy, and then enjoy it for what it is when it's physical. I am waiting for that. And I think I'll let myself enjoy it then. And to round out this episode, Paddy is going to read us a snippet of The Traitor.
I am. So this is obviously the story that's going into the anthology. I wasn't sure what part of it I'm going to read out. So I'm going to read out the part with the most action, because some of it is, I'm going to say, a little navel-gazy. For context, there are these infiltrating warriors, these stealthy kind of spear-armed warriors, and they've infiltrated a sand ship, which is a great tracked vehicle of the desert setting which the story takes place in. There's this peaceful trading clan within. They're not warriors, and they're really not prepared, and they don't know until right now that they've been infiltrated by these seasoned killers. The scene starts in the control room, what's the room of the captain is in a ship? The bridge. The story starts at the bridge. Okay,
well,
here we go.
Technically, never mind.
That's actually Matan's actual nautical knowledge has been pretty useful in this, because Matan spent a little time in the Navy.
No, we'll keep it as a bridge.
Okay. Beyond the glass, the night is quiet and clear. Enchanted beneath the moons, the land itself seems to coolly luminesce, and the interplay of light and shadow, its stony columns are dropped to big forms. Here, a woman bathing. There, a child at play, the ship moving amongst them like a wanderer in a statue garden as the figures slowly animate with the drift of its perspective. The crew within the bridge can watch in contemplation. They're far from Port Echo now, and those who sought to harm them. They are transitioning at last from an uncertain present towards a hopeful future, and inward to those dreamy spaces that live outside of time's concern. Through such a space right now. The room's air is warm and familiar, and gently alive as it hums with the devices around them. Navigation, signaling, sensors, and the inputs and outputs of chatter between decks. The give and take of shipborne life. All is well with the world. And then a sound. The shunt and clack of a lever. The pneumatic hiss of armored doors sealing the chamber like a tomb. As the crew turn and see their trespassers, as they pale and go wild-eyed and open mouths to scream, it is far too late. Curved blades lash from slashes casting hot sprays across the floor and walls and the chamber's broad windows. Panels that gave soft blues and whites a moment ago now wash the room in crimson. Some raise desperate arms in their defense. Some rise to flee, but there's nowhere in that room to run. Shara, who is a character in the story, lets forth a wild laugh. Her spear hadn't left her grip, not once since they boarded the North Star together. It had become almost unbearable, the weight of all that inertia. Now she thrusts and punctures and twists again and again, her world becoming alive with all the wicked glee unlocked within her. Those screams, those sprays, adrenaline soars within her, giving clarity like a brilliant, burning dawn. She is giddy with exhilaration. A figure emerges from an alcove, raising a weighty powder gun, detailed and decorated to bear on Shara, but the gunner is much too slow. A flick of Shara's hand from her cloak sends a spinning knife that catches them in the eye, and down they go, screaming. Their weapon tumbles to the deck, discharging wild or and grope at the embedded knife, shrieking like an arrow-struck crow. Already 5 are dead or dying, slumped over controls or crumpled to the floor. Those left are trying to recede as far back as back can go, cowering vainly under consoles or pressing into the walls in the half-mad hope that the physical might give way. They can do little else. I might leave it there. Short rating, but I'm going to leave it there.
Wonderful.
Very nice.
Ooh.
Yeah, tight, beautiful, awesome.
Thank you. Well, you
that.
guys had a lot to do with tightening that, so.
The weight of all that inertia. That was a great line.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, that was some really good one.
Really good. Some really good lines.
And if our listeners want some more great lines, the anthology, The New Mythic, is dropping December 1st. I'm going to practice this so I get really good at it. Is dropping December 1st, Amazon Kindle, and it will be available also for purchase, a physical copy as well through Amazon. Rounding out an episode with a quote, I have a quote from a C. Joybell C. And I thought this quote was applicable. It's more of a self-help quote, but when I read it, I feel like it can be applied both to if you need to talk yourself into the next edit, like maybe you're struggling, like you know it needs another pass, but you're like, but I've been tinkering forever. If you need to talk yourself into doing the next edit, or it can also be interpreted, maybe it's time to put this one down and move on to the next project. So wherever you are in that cycle, I think this quote is applicable. You can't be afraid of change. You may feel very secure in the pond that you're in, but if you never venture out of it, you will never know that there is such a thing as an ocean, a sea. Holding on to something that is good for you now may be the very reason why you don't have something better.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I like that.
It made me feel like an anxious tadpole. And I love it.
All right. Well, thank you, listeners, for joining us back into season 2. We will have regularly scheduled programming all the way to the drop of our anthology and afterwards. This has been Prose Cons, a podcast for emerging writers by emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. We will catch you next time. See ya.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.